Good evening and welcome to the Roundup from the Open Range Record. It's Thursday. Of course, my name is David Iverson, and I'm joined by a good friend of mine, Mark Jones. Mark is the National Director for Gun Owners of America. So, Mark, welcome to the show.
Hey, David, it's great to be on your show. It's the first time on this outlet, and
Yeah,
I appreciate you having me on.
well, it's been a while, and you know the drill. After it's been a while since you being on the show, why don't you take a minute or two and just tell our audience about yourself?
Well, I'm Mark Jones. I live in Johnson County, Wyoming.
We're sorry.
And
I'm just kidding.
yeah, your old stomping grounds,
I know.
David. And wife and children. I'm blessed to live in one of the last best places. And, I'm passionate about our Second Amendment. And we moved to Wyoming about 5 years ago to escape purple state tyranny, and I want to see Wyoming remain one of the last best places. Our rights are under assault across the country, and so I'm passionate about the Second Amendment and all of our constitutional rights. But day to day, I work on the Second Amendment.
Right. Okay, so how long have you been with Gun Owners of America?
About 5 years now, David. And I'm a retired wildlife biologist. I worked a whole career with university and a state agency, and also a passionate hunter. But also just a person that's passionate about constitutional rights, freedoms, and liberties. The First Amendment, the Second Amendment, I love them all.
Well, now it's a budget session, and typically in Wyoming, this is where we like to pass. Well, we like to pass gun bills anytime we can.
We do.
But budget session, that's usually an easier one, simply because it's an election year.
That's true.
And in the last few years, we've been pretty successful at passing what I think are some pretty important pieces of gun legislation. Why don't we start with just kind of talking about the things that we've got done in the past? Because I think that there's a lot of people that may not be all that aware of some of the gun laws that we have in Wyoming.
Right.
So obviously, this is a constitutional carry state.
Right.
What's that mean?
Well, constitutional carry is basically the concept that you don't have to get the state's permission to carry a firearm. And there are now 27, I think, constitutional carry states. Wyoming has been that way for quite some time.
Like 2010?
I think so,
It's
yeah.
been a while.
But now it's over half the country. And that means that you don't have to get a special permit. You don't have to get any kind, go through any kind of special paperwork. If you're a Wyoming resident and you stay in the state, you can carry a firearm, and in places where firearms are allowed, which kind of leads to the next. Let's talk about the repeal of gun-free zones.
Yeah, that was huge. Man.
That was huge, and that one is a little more confusing to a lot of people, because even though you can carry a gun in Wyoming, or have been able to for years, a lot of places were prohibited. Colleges, universities, K through 12 schools, many government buildings, even the state capitol, carry was prohibited in all those places. And we worked hard to repeal those over a number of years. In 2024, that bill passed the legislature but was vetoed by the governor. In 2025, the repeal of gun-free zones bill was passed, and the governor allowed it to become law without his signature. That was a monumental bill, David, as you well know.
Huge.
We became the fifth state that allowed carry in K through 12 schools with a permit, and a permit's required because that's the way around the federal law. There's a federal prohibition that allows an exemption with a state-issued permit. So we have to have a Wyoming concealed carry permit for K through 12, but it also made carry allowed in the Capitol constitutionally,
Right.
and most government buildings constitutionally, colleges and universities with a permit. So one of the best in the nation for opening up carry in these types of places. Not totally unique, and that's one of the points we had to get across to many of the legislators when they voted for it. There were other states that have done this for quite some time.
Hey, ironically, isn't Minnesota one of them?
They do allow carry in their capital, not the schools and universities. New Hampshire allowed it just pretty much everywhere. South Dakota had a lot of this already. So there were some other states, but we're right up there in the top 3 or 4 now in terms of opening up these gun-free zones.
And I think one thing that always fascinates me about this discussion is you have legislators, very liberal people that are absolutely against the Second Amendment, and all of the arguments that they use for, well, we can't do this because the school's going to be crawling with guns. That you can't bring a gun in a Capitol because you're going to have shootings all over. Well, the statistics really don't bear that out.
They don't, David, and you know the statistics, I'm sure. But for some of your listeners, FBI crime statistics and readily available statistics from law enforcement show that the vast majority of shootings, mass shootings, happen in gun-free zones. And it depends on what years you look at, but Dr. John Lott's done work
He's
on
done great
this,
work.
and you've seen that work. Anywhere from 85 to 95%, depending on what years you want to look at, of the shootings, mass shootings, happen in gun-free zones. And the other interesting thing, 81% of America's police support armed citizens and believe they're a deterrent to crime. So even our law enforcement officers, when they're surveyed, understand the role that armed citizens can play in protecting people.
Right, right. And I did. God, this has been. I can't believe it's been this long, but I think it's been 2 years ago. It was right after you hosted John Lott in Casper. I just kind of did some back of the envelope math, and the truth is, it is more likely that you'll get struck by lightning twice than you will be involved in any sort of mass shooting. And a lot of the arguments that we hear, more just people who aren't in favor of the Second Amendment make, and like I said, their arguments don't pan out.
They don't.
In the real world.
No.
I sat at I should have called you about this one, but in Sheridan, the school district put on a listening session about. It was right after the passage of repeal of gun-free zones, and just listening to the teachers. This place is going to be crawling with guns, and the truth is that it is very unlikely that there will be any more people carrying guns in their school than there was before, because the way the statistics work out is that the constituency that has the lowest crime rate out of everybody, even lower than police, is people who have a concealed weapons permit.
That's a great point. And I to further emphasize that, yes, that comes from actual crime statistics that can be verified. Concealed carry holders are more law-abiding than American police.
Isn't that crazy?
It is absolutely crazy. So allowing those people to carry pretty much everywhere, including K through 12, makes a lot of sense. It makes those places safer, because a madman does not obey a sign that says no firearms.
Right. Criminals don't obey the law, which is by definition why they're criminals.
Yes. And interestingly enough, there are a lot of America's schools that have allowed weapons by law-abiding people for a number of years. There's yet to be a mass shooting in a school where law-abiding people are armed. Now, I always say that kind of hesitantly because these are tragedies and we don't want this to happen. But the mass shootings that happen in schools are the ones that are gun-free zones.
Yeah.
At least so far in our nation's history. And give you an example, Texas, I think at somewhere between 35 and 40% of the schools there are armed staff or teachers or citizens. The school shootings that have happened in Texas have happened in the others.
Yeah.
And there you can find statistic after statistic like this. Taking guns away from law-abiding people does not protect people. It makes those places targets.
Now let's talk about another one. And so before we ever worked on the repeal of gun-free zones, Wyoming passed a law where school districts could they could train teachers, and those teachers could carry in the classroom. But it has always intrigued me that even in Wyoming, there weren't a lot of school districts that took advantage of that.
There weren't, David. There were that law allowed the school district to decide. The school board could choose to train and arm their own staff and teachers. And there were only 4 or 5 school districts that took advantage of that. I think that's regrettable, given all the statistics we've already talked about.
Right.
And that was probably one of the things that helped pass a repeal of gun-free zones later, because the school districts didn't step up and take advantage of the opportunity to train their teachers and staff to protect their kids. And I want to point out, anytime we talk about this, nobody has ever tried to tell any teacher or staff in Wyoming, you must have a gun.
No.
This was always voluntary. Excuse me. So, we have a lot of hunters that are teachers, a lot of ex-military. This was always voluntary if the school district would allow it.
Yes.
Nobody ever told anybody they had to do this.
Did you ever see the sign? And I don't remember which school district it was in Park County, but there was a school that had a sign out front, and it essentially it said, "We love our students, and so our teachers are armed. Enter at your own risk."
Yes. I've seen those signs in a number of places in some other states as well, where the district takes the opportunity to train an armed staff, and they put a sign up and they make it clear. And we have some evidence that works. We kind of shift from schools to the theater shootings. And I know you know the story, Colorado theater shooter a few years ago. He bypassed 7 theaters that did not
guns.
restrict people's right to carry, and specifically went to one that was a gun-free zone.
Gee, I wonder why he did that.
Criminals might be crazy, but they're not necessarily stupid.
Well, and I think the other thing that the other point that this underscores is that for many years in Wyoming, maybe the people that live here are very conservative, and I think if you were if you could do the numbers, you'd probably end up with 60-40. 60% conservative, 40 not so much. But it is the folks that run for office that are typically not pro Second Amendment. When you have a law that, hey, if you're a school district and you want your teachers to carry guns, all you got to do is pass a resolution and get them trained. Well, only 4 or 5 of them did that. Well, that tells you a lot about the people who are running for office. And I think it tells you even more when you look at our legislature, now recently it's not been that hard. I mean, there's been a fight to pass gun legislation, but we've been pretty successful. I mean, when you look at the broad scope of it, we've done some really good work.
That's true.
And so, and it's not been without a fight. I mean, there was one fight in particular that we're going to talk about in a minute.
Okay.
That, man, I didn't know if we would get it through, and you and I both took. We took a lot of heat over that one. Internet videos and boycotts of my sponsors, and it was pretty crazy.
Yes.
So I think where I'd like to go next is just kind of talk in general about the Second Amendment, because there are some shocking voter statistics when it comes to the Second Amendment.
Right.
And I'll let you. Why don't you just talk about them, because you probably know them by heart.
Okay. Well, first off, I mean, most of your listeners probably know the Second Amendment protects our right to keep and bear arms.
I would hope my listeners know that.
It's very short. It's sweet. It says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I like to quote our greatest Chief Justice that's currently living, Clarence Thomas, who recently said in a dissenting opinion when the Supreme Court ruled the wrong way on an issue, he said, the Second Amendment's not a secondary right.
Yeah.
Because it's number 2, he was kind of chastising the others on the court. Because it's the second one doesn't mean it's secondary. He says it's a primary right, and that we have historically treated it at the federal level as a secondary right. The founders put it second for a reason. The First Amendment protected our right to free speech, freedom of religion, and they put the Second Amendment there because they knew that was going to protect the First Amendment. But our federal government typically in our history has not treated it like a primary right. And give you an example, we have a National Firearms Act that's still here since 1937 that imposes a lot of unconstitutional restrictions on Americans. But to your bigger question, or your other question about the way, do these people vote? Do hunters, do Second Amendment advocates, gun owners vote? And we found some fascinating statistics back in 2024 when President Trump was running for his second term. And in some of the swing states, as many as half of the gun owners or hunters or sometimes they were the same people, as many as half of them were not voting.
It's just shocking to me.
Yes.
I mean, out of all the groups of people that should be sensitive to gun policy. It should be hunters.
Well, yes, and it should be. And, a Kamala Harris presidency was unthinkable. I mean, a lot of people thought it would have been the end of the Second Amendment, probably the First Amendment, too.
Probably both of them, yeah.
So while while President Trump hasn't been perfect on guns, he's certainly been much friendlier than Kamala Harris. And there was a lot of effort put into identifying who these people were, these gun owners or hunters or people who were both gun owners and hunters, and getting them to the polls, particularly in Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Those were 4 key swing states. And we spent a lot of money, close to $3 million actually, trying to turn these people out in those swing states. And it gets a little tricky. In some states, you have to be careful which gun owners you turn out, particularly Wisconsin.
Okay, what do you mean?
You'll find this fascinating. In Wisconsin, 30 to 40% of the gun owners will vote Democrat. So
What?
you actually don't want them to come to the polls. You only want certain ones to come to the polls. So we worked with some other groups in the United States that care about constitutional rights and the Second Amendment to try to identify the right ones to stir up and get to go vote. But in Wisconsin, you don't want them all to go vote.
That's crazy.
Isn't that fascinating, though?
How could you be a gun owner and a hunter and be a Democrat?
That gets into long discussions about history and unions and family history and other factors. Sociologists would have to get into that. But in other states, like let's take Montana, for example, we worked hard in the Senate race up there. If you could get the gun owners out in Montana, they generally voted Republican.
Right.
So it was a lot different than Wisconsin, where you had to be careful who you got to go to the poll. But it is amazing that such a large percentage of these people have historically not voted in presidential elections.
Now, there's another group too, and we're talking guns tonight, but I think that this is a point worth bringing up. The other group that doesn't really vote consistently is Christians.
Yeah, and David, that's always fascinated me too. And a lot of times, Christians are gun owners. A lot of times, a lot of Christians understand the importance of the Second Amendment to protect their First Amendment rights. And that's another one that is kind of baffling. Why would you not go vote to represent your values and the things that you want for your family and your children?
Well, and a lot of this too, and I think you brought the point up earlier, is that it goes back to a lot of history with legislation. And, as it relates to Christians, well, how often have we been told that, well, you can't talk politics in church.
Right.
First of all, that's bullcrap. You can.
That is.
And I think as it relates to hunters, we get kind of complacent.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're the person that, okay, you've got a couple rifles, you've got a couple shotguns, maybe you have a pistol or two, everything's good for you.
Right.
Right. And as long as there isn't a push to take away your, the rights that you already have, well, then why should you get out and vote? Well, the reason behind that is there are people who are actively trying to take away your Second Amendment rights. Now, thankfully, in Wyoming, those people don't stay in office for very long.
Right.
I mean, if you want to get yourself unelected in Wyoming, be against the Second Amendment and be in favor of an income tax. And that's a good way to get unelected.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to kind of shift gears a little bit because we're in this weird spot in our country that we have the Constitution. We've been talking about the Second Amendment for 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
But we seem to have laws to tell people you have to follow the Second Amendment. And a couple of years ago, back in, 2022?
Yes.
We passed the Second Amendment. I always get it confused. Is it the Preservation Act or the Protection Act?
Protection Act.
Protection Act. The other one was the other
Preservation
guys.
Act.
Yeah. We won't talk about them. Anyway, so essentially, the SEPA bill, it says that if a police officer or any government official, really, and the way the bill reads is it could be the secretary that answers the phone that tells the sheriff, and the sheriff comes and takes your gun. So it covers all government employees. Mm-hmm. Even, there was a case in Bighorn where,
mm-hmm.
It's really complicated, but just to simplify it for this discussion, ATF raided this guy's house. They seized a whole bunch of guns. They cut the locks off or cut the hinges off his safe. Now, the SAPA bill, had it been enforced, it would have been the fire department. It would have been the EMT that was there. It would have been the police officer. It would have been the ATF. It would have been all those people. So the Second Amendment Preservation Act, Protection Act, see, I still get him confused. So essentially it says, if your guns are seized unconstitutionally, then in Wyoming, it's a criminal penalty. And that was, we were super proud that we got that passed. And it's a year in jail and $1,000 fine.
Right.
So now we've made some revisions to that. And right now there are, five gun bills.
There are 5 gun bills alive in the House right now.
Okay, so let's kind of run down those.
Okay.
And the first one I want to talk about is the SAPA bill. So
Okay.
there's a bill to do some amendments on that one.
Right.
And so why don't you tell us what that bill does?
Okay, great. Yeah, and it's a great opening, David. And a little more background. So a lot of people get frustrated because why do you have to pass a bill to protect the Second Amendment when it's in the Constitution? And the short answer is the federal government hasn't always respected, as Clarence Thomas said, a lot of times the federal government treats the Second Amendment as a secondary right. We have a National Firearms Act. We have organizations like the ATF that many constitutionalists view as unconstitutional agencies.
Yeah.
So what states have started doing is passing laws, and we can't stop the federal government from coming into a state and doing something unconstitutional, unfortunately. I mean, we have to go to the courts and fight that through the courts. But what we can do at the state level is stop the state and any subdivision of the state from helping the federal government
Exactly.
do unconstitutional gun control. And that's what SAPA was all about. It said the state of Wyoming will not help the federal government with any kind of unconstitutional federal gun control, whether it's magazine bans, AR-15 bans, whatever it is. The state of Wyoming and all of its subdivisions will not help. And if they do, it's a criminal penalty against the individuals involved. I would say that's just going to come back on the sheriff or the leaders who tell the officers to go do it. Not necessarily the rank and file deputy who's told by the sheriff to do something.
No, it's the organization.
It's going to come back on the sheriff probably.
Yeah.
And we were criticized, oh, nobody will ever enforce this and blah, 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 blah. Well, it is a deterrent. It is a potential criminal offense of a year in jail. So I would argue that while the law wasn't perfect, it's a heck of a deterrent if you can get a year in jail for cooperating with federal gun control. But the other aspect of that GOA and I have always been consistent about, David, is that we also need a civil process. And citizens need to understand the difference in criminal and civil. The 2022 law established a criminal penalty against an individual officer or official, government official. And we've always been consistent in saying we also need a civil process where a citizen who's aggrieved can go to court and sue not an individual officer, but the department.
Yes.
For any involvement in unconstitutional federal gun control. No state has both. Some states have a criminal, some states have a civil. And what we've been trying to do here in Wyoming for 5 years, and what is moving in the House right now, is a law that would add that civil process to our existing criminal protections. If we get this passed, it'll be the best combination possible. It won't be perfect. You can never write a perfect law. And as long as you have a federal government that treats the Second Amendment as a secondary right, you can never write a perfect law.
So most of the arguments we heard against the original SAPA bill, and you kind of alluded to a couple of them, is that, well, nobody will enforce this.
Right.
No prosecutor is going to charge a local sheriff for doing this. Well, that's not a problem with the law. That's a problem with our legal system. And, across the United States, the problem we have is prosecutors who just won't enforce the law.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so that doesn't mean that there's a problem with the statute. That means we have a problem with our culture.
Amen.
That we don't treat criminals as they are. They're criminals.
And David, I couldn't agree more. And to say that someone won't enforce a law is a reason not to pass it is kind of counterintuitive, because then
Yeah.
we have a lot of laws that may not get enforced. Prosecutors can pick and choose what things to go after in some cases. And another thing I should point out, prosecutors in Wyoming are elected. And so the public does have some say so. If you have prosecutors that refuse to enforce these types of things, if they happen, there is a recourse. And everybody has some people who have criticized us for passing that law, you and me and others who worked for it. Some people who have criticized us have failed to consider the fact that the civil process is not going to be easy in Wyoming either.
No.
Because to take a civil lawsuit against an agency requires you to hire your own attorney, pay all the fees, get standing in court, and go in front of an appointed judge. So neither process is going to be easy. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have both.
Right.
And I look at them as deterrents, because, hey, listen, there's always the chance you could get yourself in big trouble, both criminally and civilly. And I think it's the best we can do. We're constantly trying to make laws better and better, and nothing is going to be perfect.
You know, I've got a good friend of mine in Sheridan, and he was at a school board meeting, and I don't remember the particulars of it, but basically they shut him down
I remember
in the school
that.
board meeting, and so he found a lawyer or a law firm, and he sued the school district, and it took a long time to get through, but in the end he won, and now there's a court ruling that says the school board can't shut you down,
Right.
and it's all thanks to Harry.
Right.
My point being that while it is not easy to sue, an individual or, an agency, we hear all the time, oh, you can sue over everything. Well, okay, but you still have to hire an attorney, and you still have to pay
it's
all the
not that
fees.
easy.
It's not that easy, right? But we still have to pass laws. I mean, this is how our system works.
Right.
And if we believe in the Constitution, then we have to believe in the system that supports it as
Yes.
well. All right, so we got another bill.
Okay.
It's kind of like the SEPA bill, just slightly different. This one is about red flag gun laws, and as I understand it, you correct me if I'm wrong here, Mark, but there are a lot of states that have what I would call preemptive laws. So, somebody says, "Oh, that Mark Jones, he's a dangerous guy. He's going to hurt somebody," and then the police show up at Mark Jones's door and they say, "Hey, Mark, we're going to be taking your gun safe out the front door because you're a threat." It's been reported. I mean, there are states where that's actually a thing.
There are.
So we've got a law that kind of deals with that. And why don't you tell us about it?
Yeah. So basically, a red flag gun confiscation order or law is where you can make an accusation against a person, and that person is deprived of their due process rights. In America, you're innocent until proven guilty, or at least we thought we were as Americans.
Should be.
The Fifth Amendment protects your due process rights. But a red flag gun confiscation order essentially means if let's say we're neighbors and we have a dispute, and I go to the police and say, David and I got in a fight over our boundary, and David has guns, and I'm scared.
Lots of them.
And I'm scared.
They
Yeah,
used to. They're lost in a tragic boating accident.
I know yours all went to the bottom of Lake DeSmet.
Yes.
But and I tell the police, you're scary and you got guns, and without any evidence, without you having a right to defend yourself, they come and take your guns away till this process is resolved. That's essentially what a red flag gun confiscation order is. It deprives you of your Second Amendment rights. It deprives you of your rights to due process. There's multiple amendments to the Constitution that are violated by those. Well, we outlawed those in Wyoming. And essentially, the law states that if that happens to you, you can go to court and sue the department in civil court, which is great. Again, it's not going to be easy. You have to hire a lawyer, spend thousands of dollars.
Sure.
And this other bill you're talking about that's in the House right now would tie that very clearly to our Second Amendment criminal protections. I would argue that a great prosecutor would already do this, because Section 9-14-203 of Wyoming statute says those kinds of things are actually a crime. Okay?
Yes.
This makes it crystal clear and ties those together so nobody can ignore it.
All right. So long and the short of it, SAPA bill, the one we passed in 2022, it had a criminal penalty in it.
Right?
The version this year adds the civil penalty to
Exactly.
it. Now with the red flag law that I think that was 2024 that was passed,
I think
right?
it was 2 years ago. Yes.
Okay. So this one does kind of the opposite. It had a civil penalty in it, and now we're adding a criminal penalty.
Right.
So the two laws they're going to work essentially the same.
They essentially would work together. They close lots of loopholes. They make it harder to be ignored if a prosecutor perhaps, and I'm not, hey, listen, I have nothing against any prosecutor in Wyoming. There's 23 county prosecutors. Let's say we get in a county that doesn't have a great one. This makes it a lot harder to
Few
ignore.
of those.
Yeah, this makes everything crystal clear about that the legislature is establishing protections for Wyoming citizens and their Second Amendment rights.
Okay, so what do you have the bill numbers for those two so our listeners can
I
follow
believe
them?
that House Bill 98 would be the amendments to the red flag, and House Bill 130 would be the Second Amendment Protection Act amendments.
Okay, now there's also three other gun bills.
There are.
We like to pass gun bills in budget sessions.
Let's talk about why real quick.
Okay, yeah, go for
Because
it.
I had a friend the other day saying, well, it's a budget session. It's a 2/3 introductory. The threshold to introduce a bill in the first chamber is 2/3 of the vote. He says, well, that must be hard to pass a gun bill. I'm like,
No.
actually, no. So the thing you're not remembering, this is an election year. So that 2/3 threshold is pretty easy on a
gun bill.
recorded vote where the public is watching. Where we always have trouble in Wyoming is with behind the scenes activity, procedural things. That's what kills gun bills in Wyoming. But when Wyoming legislators have to take a public vote, we can get things passed. And that's why we've passed all these laws in Wyoming the last few years.
So I remember, do you remember, and I don't know, maybe you weren't in the House when this happened, but I think it was the repeal of gun-free zones. There was in the House, it was late at night, and there were 7 amendments to the bill. And all 7, any one of them, if had any one of them passed, it would have gutted the bill. Mm-hmm. Now, we were very careful. I had the microphone rolling, and they were doing stuff like when they would go to vote, they'd call for Jones, and what you'd hear them go aye or nay. Mm-hmm. Well, so they were doing that so it wouldn't be recorded.
Right.
Nobody could hear them. Well, I've got the high capacity assault microphone that was pointed down at the floor, and there were some other gun lobbyists and senators behind us, and we were taking notes. And even at one point, one of the people on the House floor, his name was Dan Zwanitzer, he got up and tried to object to us standing there,
Recording.
Holding them to account.
I was there.
Yeah, you were there. That's right. But that's what you have to do, because even in Wyoming, there, like Mark said, there are people that work behind the scenes. One of my favorite sound bites is Bill Landon. And Bill Landon is the guy that claims he was in a school shooting at Casper College.
But it was with a bow and arrow. He doesn't tell that part.
Yeah, it was with the bow and arrow, and he was about a half a block away.
Yeah.
Anyway, Bill Landon and Cale Case, they go through this long process gutting this gun bill. And then when it comes to a vote, they kill the bill. Well, the soundbite is them laughing
and giving each other high fives.
High fives and laughing. Hey, we did all this work. Ha, ha, ha.
David, that was late at night in a late committee hearing. They didn't think people were watching.
Yep.
I was there. And I walked out pretty dejected because they had killed that bill. That was the first year we passed the repeal of gun-free zones. Mm-hmm. And the next morning we pulled it on the Senate floor as out of a dead committee. There's a procedure to do that, yep. And we pulled it on the Senate floor 16-15. That bill went on to pass and be vetoed by the governor. And this is a good time to point out, a lot of times we Second Amendment advocates have worked together to pass a lot of good gun legislation in Wyoming. But I would argue that that's not necessarily because we have the super majority of pro-gun people.
No, we don't.
We have actually
the supermajority of scared politicians.
Amen, brother. We have a minority of true constitutionalists in the Wyoming legislature. But if you can make a gun vote public, many of the the others in the legislature are afraid to vote against it. That is why we've been successful in passing gun legislation in Wyoming.
Yeah, and it's the irony being, Mark, is that one of the things that we can thank for it is COVID, because before COVID, we didn't have YouTube, our legislative sessions weren't broadcast, and now they are. And you can go back, and you can go all the way back to 2021 if you want, and look and watch what they did. And so, like you say, the best thing for the Second Amendment is a scared politician.
Yes, it is, and especially in an election year.
All right, so we got three other bills.
Okay.
Let's see here. There's one that would allow 18-year-olds to conceal carry. There's one to allow carrying on colleges and universities, and there's a finance bill. Let's start with the financial bill.
Okay.
Because that's another fix.
Okay. And okay, so that's called House Bill 97, Second Amendment Financial Privacy Act. And this essentially, the what caused this to come about was, believe it or not, a group in Europe that sets banking procedures and policies for the world started pushing merchant category codes upon U.S. financial institutions. And it was kind of confusing, and it still can be confusing to a lot of people. The original purpose of these was not to actually identify individual.
It was marketing.
It was to figure out who was selling guns so they could debank them. And when they first started issuing these codes, or trying to, they weren't giving them to Shields and Cabela's and folks that were selling those guns at that level. They were trying to give them to mom and pop gun shops because they wanted to debank them. This was an international effort to debank gun stores. But a second component of it was eventually to track the sale of guns within America. So states started pushing back, and Texas and Florida were two of the first, and they essentially outlawed this practice. A couple years ago, we outlawed it in Wyoming, but the bill had some loopholes and didn't have good.
It was a terrible bill.
It was a terrible bill, but we got something in the statute. So this bill this year tightens everything up, makes it crystal clear. I think we'll be the 20th state to have a really good prohibition with some teeth in it, where there's actual penalties if you try to do this. It stops financial institutions from tracking firearm sales, both against businesses. David Iverson's gun shop, they can't track what you do, so they can figure out how to take retribution against you and debank you. And they can't figure out what I come buy from you. They can't do that. And when we first started talking about this, it was actually several years ago, and it didn't pass the first couple times we tried it. And one of the arguments against it was going to hurt businesses and that it was going to hurt the economy.
Credit unions.
Right. Well, Texas and Florida did it, and that kind of squashed that argument. Two of the biggest economies in America did it long before Wyoming. Now, and what's interesting is that now that 20 states have pushed back, the international folks have kind of backed off for now. But now, hey, listen, if things go bad and we have a Democrat president in 2028, look out. So we're kind of taking a preemptive step to stop this. And I should also point out, some states mandate this. New York and California in particular. So, and we know from history that a lot of things that start in California spread. So we need to take preemptive action to ensure that this can't be brought into Wyoming in the future when national politics change.
Well, and I think that there's an increased need for this because of things like central bank digital currencies. That is a real thing in Europe, and there are politicians in the U.S. Congress that would love nothing more than to do this. But think about this possibility that my father-in-law, the Master Chief, goes to the gun store and he says, "I'd like to buy that gun," and the proprietor says, "Sorry, you've exceeded your gun quota for the year." That's a real fear.
It's a real fear.
And fear is probably not the right word. That's a possibility.
It is.
If we have a central bank digital currency or credit card companies.
Yes.
By the way, don't buy guns with a credit card.
And that's
I did just the other day. It
that's
was
the
on a debit
original
card,
way they were. That's the original intent, was tracking credit card purchases
Yeah.
of this international organization that led to these discussions we're having now.
Yep. All right. So a couple other bills.
Okay.
One of them is colleges and universities.
Okay.
This one had a lot of people spooked. Has a lot of people spooked.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy college kids running around with guns. How dare you arm the liberals at the University of Wyoming?
Mm-hmm. So this is Representative Harrelson Bill sponsored this bill, and it's really just a little bit of an expansion of last year's bill where we repealed gun-free zones. Currently, when we did that, the requirement is that you have a concealed carry permit at colleges and universities. If this bill passes, you will be able to carry at colleges and universities under Wyoming's statewide constitutional carry laws. So it does away with the need for a permit. That's all it does. The permit will still be needed for K through 12 schools because that is the only way around the federal law that prohibits guns at K through 12. There's a specific exemption in the federal law for state issued permits. So as long as that federal law is in place, we will always have to have a concealed carry permit at K through 12.
Yeah, and this is just another example of where we have federal laws that are absolutely unconstitutional.
Yes.
And that we're left here in the state to try to figure out a way, I don't want to say around them, because the 10th Amendment is very clear.
Right.
That what is not specifically in the Constitution is left up to the states.
Right.
And there's nowhere in the Constitution that it says the government can restrict your ownership of firearms.
Right.
And so it is left up to states like Wyoming to do that. All right, we got one more bill on our list. 18-year-olds. This one, I have always had a lot of heartburn against this law for a couple of reasons. If you can be sent overseas and handed a firearm and to go fight for your country, I see absolutely no reason why you can't come home and do the exact same thing.
Right.
And in a state like Wyoming right now, you can't.
Yeah, and this one is specific to concealed carry permits. Currently, you have to be 21 to get one in Wyoming. Now, first question some of your listeners may ask is, why do you need one? We're a constitutional carry state. Well, number one is for reciprocity. There are 36 states that honor our concealed carry permit, Nebraska and Colorado being too close by, that we may need it if we travel there. And I used this argument with a legislator today who was a little unsure of this bill. I said, what if you have a 19-year-old young lady who lives in Wyoming but goes to nursing school in Nebraska? I said, she can protect herself. This young lady can carry a firearm in Wyoming, but when she goes into Nebraska, she can't unless she has a Wyoming concealed carry permit. Colorado, they honor our concealed carry permit. Maybe
Really?
They still do.
Oh, wow. So I figured when Jared Pullis was there, that was a goner.
They're still honoring it as of today. I won't say they have problems down there that we could do a whole show on Colorado's problems. That'd be an interesting contrast. But yeah, currently they still honor our permit, and maybe that's a better example. Probably more Wyoming kids go to school at Colorado State or Colorado University or other schools.
It sucks to be a CSU ram.
Yeah. So, but anyway, take that 19-year-old young lady. She can't protect herself when she goes to Colorado without that permit. So, and you can say the same thing about young men. They go to work the oil fields in Colorado, right? Or they go to work the oil fields in New Mexico. Hey, Colorado and New Mexico honor our permit. So, as you've already said, we send these young people off to war. We give them M16s, but we can't allow them to have a firearm permit.
And I think the argument against this one, I think, is the most despicable one that I have ever heard. And it is always aimed at veterans. And it's that, they're the veterans, they got mental problems, and we can't let them have firearms. It is absolutely disingenuous. It's the most despicable argument I've ever heard.
Right.
Because that's the poster child that they use when some guy might have PTSD, who, by the way, is no different than, any 1,000 people a day, probably a month, to do the same thing. But they always pick on the veteran.
Yeah.
And, this whole thing about, not being able to carry a concealed weapon when you're 18, I think it's I think it's just wrong.
Well, and think about it too. The left wants to make sure 18-year-olds can vote. Well, if you can vote, shouldn't you be able to? If you're mentally developed enough to vote, shouldn't you be able to exercise a constitutional right,
You would think so.
which is in the Second Amendment?
Well,
I find that interesting.
yeah, and here's the other part of it too. That in Wyoming, if you're 18, you can buy a rifle,
You
you
can,
can buy a shotgun,
right?
you can buy an AR-15. You can buy, you can load up on ammo, except if it's a handgun
Yeah, you
ammo
can't buy a handgun, or you
or a
can't buy a
handgun.
handgun either because of
Yeah,
federal law. Now, you can possess one if your father wants to let you give you a handgun to use under constitutional carry. You can possess it. You just can't buy it because of federal law.
right. So we've got a lot of different firearm laws that are, well, first they're unconstitutional,
They are.
but second, they just, a lot of them don't make any sense.
No, they don't. It gets back to what we kind of said earlier in the show and what Clarence Thomas has said. In America, we treat the Second Amendment as a secondary right.
Right.
All these federal restrictions. And then in some states, Colorado, New York, Illinois, then you've got state restrictions. And in
Yes.
some states that have done away with their preemption statutes, which stops local gun
That's
control,
that's
they have
fascinating.
local statutes.
So let's just talk about that just for a second, because that is kind of a little Wyoming oddity. We fixed it now.
We fixed it
Okay,
2 years ago. Yeah.
but
3 years,
so
2 or 3.
I can't remember. It was Dave Kinski's bill.
23. I think it was 23.
Yeah. Well, before then, we didn't have a preemption statute.
We thought we did, but it
We
had a big
didn't.
giant loophole in it.
Right. And so what that meant is that there, like every community in Wyoming, like, and this is, going back to Old West laws, but almost all of them had this crazy law that you couldn't carry guns in town.
Right.
And it really is like the movie Unforgiven.
Yes.
If you read somewhere on my computer, I've got a copy of the ordinance for Buffalo. And it's fascinating to read because it's like blowguns and brass knuckles and blackjacks and firearms. Well, before we passed that fix in 2023, technically those laws were still absolutely on the books.
They were.
And so with gun, and the reason I bring this up is with gun policy, it is not as simple as just saying we're going to pass this law and you can do this. It's not as simple as saying, well, now an 18-year-old can have a concealed weapons permit, because there are radical politicians in Washington, D.C. that if the law you write isn't tight enough, they will find every loophole through it and they will exploit it.
And you're absolutely right, David. And a lot of people thought that local gun control was prohibited in Wyoming.
It wasn't.
They did not understand that there had been a mistake made in recording that statute when it was passed. And actually, local gun control was allowed in Wyoming.
Yeah.
It just wasn't being enforced. So we fixed that in 2023. There can be no local gun control in Wyoming. All gun control would have to come from the state legislature in Cheyenne. Now, it's interesting. Colorado went the other way.
I was just going to bring this up.
Yeah.
Talk about that for a
Yeah,
minute.
Colorado had a preemption statute that prohibited local gun control. A couple years ago, the Democrats swept into power, took control of both houses, and Jared Polis became governor. And one of the first things they did was repealed their preemption statute, which Wyoming had just fixed.
Right.
Fascinating. Two totally different ends of the spectrum. Now they allow gun control. And you have to be very careful when you travel in Colorado, particularly in the I-25 corridor, because a lot of those municipalities have their own little weird gun laws
Yeah.
now.
Well, one of them that sticks in, this one isn't on the I-25 corridor, but Boulder. I mean, the People's Republic of Boulder. There are all sorts of gun control laws there that they have passed at the local level.
Yeah.
And just think about the problem this creates for the gun owner.
Yeah.
If you're only traveling through, like you mentioned, you may go from one county to another. Maybe your guns are in the trunk, and maybe they're even in a case, and you may go through another town, and you'll absolutely be in violation. You can go to jail.
Yes. Yeah, I would argue that, and you would agree, that's very unconstitutional. That's not equal protection. I'm a citizen. I have a firearm. If I want to go visit my family in New Mexico and drive through Colorado, I shouldn't become a felon because I go through a local jurisdiction that's violated the Constitution. Terribly unconstitutional, but that does exist in some municipalities in Colorado now.
Before and I want to talk a little bit of national politics in just a second, but we
Okay.
left out one big gun law
Okay.
that Wyoming has, and it's the Stand Your Ground law.
Right.
Okay, so explain what that is real quick.
That's essentially the law, and a lot of states have it, is that if your life is threatened, you have the right to stand and defend yourself and use lethal force if necessary. A lot of states have that, actually. Some states actually have a duty to retreat.
Yeah,
You have to run, and
ridiculous.
and which actually makes you more vulnerable. Like if someone's coming after you to kill you with a knife, and you have an obligation to try to run away, well, they may stab you in the back. In Wyoming, if they're coming at you trying to kill you with a knife,
You
you can
shoot 'em.
shoot them. And a lot of states, even a lot of blue states, actually have a stand your ground law where you can shoot somebody trying to kill you. Wyoming has one.
Okay, all right. So now let's talk we got about 10 minutes left, ish, a little bit less.
Okay.
Let's talk a little bit of national politics because this is another case where it is absolutely essential that you hold all politicians accountable because some of them, you may think that they're great and they're awesome and they love the Second Amendment, but in truth, some of them don't actually act that way. One of those, let's go before we get to the big one that everybody likes. Let's talk about Ronald Reagan.
Okay.
So Ronald Reagan, the father of modern conservatism, Ronaldus Magnus, he wasn't so good on the Second Amendment, was he?
No, and I actually love Ronald Reagan.
So do I.
I was a teenager when Reagan was in office, and I still have a lot of respect for a lot of what he did. I lived through the Cold War, threat of nuclear war, all that stuff. Reagan did a lot of good things. But yeah, he did falter on the Second Amendment. I think he supported the 1986 Gun Control Act. I
Yes,
believe
he
that
did.
was the right year because I think we have a 1968 Gun Control Act and an 86, if my years are right. So, yeah, we have to be honest. Reagan was great in a lot of ways, but he did support gun control the second year of his second term.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about Daddy Trump. I love Trump. I love a lot of what he's doing, but he's done some stuff with the Second Amendment that I think if most people paid attention to it or even thought about it, maybe it wouldn't cause them not to vote for him, but certainly ask some questions. The first one that comes to mind is the bump stock ban.
Right,
Okay, a bump stock is not part of a firearm; it's an accessory.
right.
And it was a knee-jerk reaction to a horrible tragedy
Right.
in Las Vegas. But that one there, I wasn't shocked that they did something. I was shocked that Trump was the guy that did it.
Yeah, and President Trump, first off, I want to reiterate, we spent almost $3 million to help him get reelected. I mean, we understood that that a Kamala Harris presidency was a
Big
disaster.
disaster.
But we also have to be honest that President Trump has had his ups and downs with the Second Amendment. He did say at one point in a conversation with Democrats regarding red flag laws that we could take the guns first and do due process
Yeah.
later. Now, fortunately, I will say this in his support, though. He did learn, I think, from some of those mistakes in his first presidency. I'm sure he had good advisors and folks talking to them, and he came out much stronger later on Second Amendment issues. I guess my biggest bone to pick with the Trump administration now is with probably the Justice Department and our Attorney General, Pam Bondi. And that gets really complicated. A lot of Americans aren't following it, but as recently as November, the Justice Department has issued legal opinions defending the unconstitutional National Firearms Act,
Wow.
which we're challenging in court.
Right.
And I know you know this story in and out, but back in the summer of 2025, there was a big effort to repeal the National Firearms Act. We came really close,
Closest we've ever gotten.
close as America's ever come. The NFA, National Firearms Act, been around since 1937, completely unconstitutional. We almost got it repealed this summer, and for a lot of reasons, it didn't happen at the last minute. But what Congress did was they lowered the NFA tax from 200 to zero. Well, when they did that, I mean, they should have repealed it. But when they didn't repeal it but lowered the tax, they left a really good opening for a legal challenge, because the Supreme Court only upheld the NFA.
Because of the tax.
Congress has the power to tax. I don't agree with that interpretation. I think it's unconstitutional, but they did say you can do the NFA because Congress has the authority to tax. Well, now the tax is zero.
It's not a tax.
So we're suing to try to overturn it. We didn't get it overturned in the legislative process. We narrowly missed it. So now we're trying to overturn it in the courts. And you would think the Trump administration would jump in there and support us, but Bondi is defending the National Firearms Act. Very frustrating, very frustrating. There have been a lot of people expressing frustration and hoping that the president will do something about this, about the attorney general. So to be fair, the current Justice Department is not taking strong stances on our Second Amendment rights in some cases.
Yeah. Well, and again, it goes, I think it has a lot to do with who gets appointed and who's in power. And, with Pam Bondi, I really have a big problem with her. I think if she spent less time on Fox News and more time doing her job, would probably be in a better place. However, in the last interview I did with Representative Hageman, I kind of made a crack like that, and she corrected me. And she said, no. With this Epstein thing, of course, it's a little bit different. Okay. She said, well, she filed all the motions in court. So she's waiting on the courts to respond.
Okay.
And so the reason I bring that up is a lot of these things are really complicated.
Yeah.
And with like the tax stamp now being zero. All right, so we've only got a few minutes left, and I want to give you some time to talk about what your organization has been doing, throughout the Biden administration. I don't know how many times you guys sued, but it was a lot.
Oh yeah.
And how you're still fighting to hope maybe repeal the NFA. So just tell my listeners what your organization's been doing.
Well, a couple of things we haven't talked about, and I'm real proud of. During the Biden years, as you've already said, we sued Biden a lot over unconstitutional executive actions. One of my favorites that we won, in 2023, Biden issued an executive order that effectively killed hunter safety, archery, and shooting sports in America's schools.
Yeah.
Now, the first thing people are going to say is, what? In schools?
Well, we never, what?
Well, since 1965, school boards have had the ability to have hunter safety, archery, and shooting teams. And it may surprise some people in some school districts. If you don't have it, hey, it's your school district's fault. But there are urban schools all over America that have had shooting teams since the 1960s.
Yes.
And Biden issued an executive order to kill that, to not even give the school boards the latitude to do it. And we fought that, and I was involved in that because I kind of have led our national hunting, anything hunting related I get involved with in other states. And it was one of the few times that Congress actually passed a law to override one of Biden's executive orders. Once the light was shown on that and people really understood it, Democrats in rural areas and red states voted to overturn that. And we actually got a law passed to reinstate the ability, and again, can't make them do it.
Right.
But any school district in America can have hunter safety, an archery team, and or a shooting team, as it should be and has been since 1965. That was a big win, and I'm proud of that one.
No, that was a good one. A lot of people don't know that, at our nation's founding and shortly thereafter, there were laws that you had to own a firearm and ammunition. At that time, it was powder and lead, but there were laws that required you to have a firearm. And fast forward into the mid the 50s, 60s. As you mentioned, schools had shooting teams.
Yes.
Many schools had a firing range in the school.
Yes.
Not outside, in the school.
Yes.
And so in the basement. And we've gone a really long ways past that.
We have. And David, to point out, a lot of America's kids don't have access to either hunter safety unless they get it through school. We actually got statistics together for that fight in 2023. And there are thousands and thousands of kids in each state that if their school didn't offer it, they had no way to get hunter safety.
Right.
Even in Wyoming, there were I think we identified I think the number may have been 5,000. 5,000 kids a year go through it in school.
There's a lot.
And the other thing I should point out, these archery and shooting teams, urban places right outside Washington, D.C., had shooting teams in their schools since 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
So some people may not like that, but it's a pathway to the outdoors, a pathway to a shooting tradition. I'm certain that a lot of these kids go on to join the military, whatever. It's an American tradition that Biden just tried to kill with an executive order.
Well, and I think it's a Democrat ethos. Now, you can walk into our Capitol and sit in the House, and Democrats that they probably own guns, they will not vote for any of the gun bills.
Right.
I interviewed one of the Democrats, Trey Sherwood, and on my show, she talks about how she likes to go shooting and loves her guns, but try to get her to vote on a gun bill.
I don't think I've ever seen her vote for a gun bill. In fact, the gun bills that just passed House committee, there were 4 passed the committee she was on. She voted against all of them.
Yeah.
All 4 of them.
So it really is the Democrat, ideology. It's almost like a religion.
Well, it's almost, I don't know if I haven't read their platform lately, but
tried.
It is one of the cornerstones of their agenda in America now is gun control.
Yes. And I think, and maybe this is a good place to end our discussion, but Wyoming is proof that guns don't kill people. that guns here probably outnumber the population 10-1. And I bet that number, if we did the math on it, I bet those are just the guns you know about.
Right.
Now, just about every family in Wyoming has, at least one, probably more,
right,
in the closet. And we have the lowest crime rate in the country. And the reason for that is you probably don't want to break into any random house because you're probably going to get shot.
I agree. Yes. Per capita, I've seen statistics, and of course, different studies give different results. But Montana and Wyoming, probably highest per capita gun rates, ownership
Absolutely.
in America.
All right. Well, we pretty much burned up our hour. If my listeners want to get a hold of you, if they want more information, how do they do that?
So if they want information about Gun Owners of America, it's real simple, gunowners.org. And if they want to contact me, I'll give my email address. I'm happy to answer questions. They can send an email to mark.jones@gunowners.org, and I will respond. I try to respond to every message I get. We're fighting for the Second Amendment every day. And I love the Constitution and I love the Second Amendment. So it's a good job to have.
I love things that go boom and laws that let me do that.
Amen.
All right. Well, thank you for watching tonight. Thank you for watching all week long. We'll be back on Monday with another edition of the Roundup. Make sure that you send me a note if there's stuff you liked. If you don't like Mark, I don't know how that's possible. But anyway, give us some feedback. But for now, have a good evening. Have a good rest of your week and weekend, and we'll be back on Monday. Don't forget about the Open Range Record. We're publishing a lot of stuff, stories that the other folks are just not, because they're not really interested in news. So thank you. Have a good evening, and we'll talk to you later.